In spite of the glamour of Hollywood, you might not see fur products there anymore. We'll talk about it on the program today. Some pediatricians are now writing an RX for playing for children, known as nature prescriptions. Can you believe it? And Megan the Millennial will be on board with Change Your Life technology. Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilberg, your host. This is America's radio town hall format and forum. We invite two everyday Americans to come around the microphone from their places in America. We call it the water cooler, and let their hair down with me on thought-provoking conversation starters. We welcome this week Kathy to the air. She is in the nutrition industry. Hello, Kathy.
Hello, Terry. Thanks for having me today.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for being on board. And we also have Susan, who is a pilot, and she is also active with the Daughters of the American Revolution. Hi, Susan. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's get started, ladies. It seems to be Ladies' Day. I want to go right initially to this one topic that I've been really thinking about a lot, and I know a lot of Americans are thinking about it, because over the last couple of weeks, many Americans have gone to primary polls, primary votes after being polled or polled coming out of their primary vote with regard to the midterms. All right. Fast forward to the midterms. President Trump was implicated in criminal wrongdoing with Michael Cohen. Most Americans that follow news know this. And Michael Cohen, his then personal attorney, flipped for the prosecution. So with the president's good men, Paul Manafort and now Michael Cohen, becoming criminals on the same day. And by the way, in case you didn't notice, that day was August 21st. The Democrats seem to be circling the wagons, calling louder for impeachment. And even to the point where they're trying to nail Brett Kavanaugh on all kinds of questions in their private sessions, the U.S. Senate, that is, to try to make sure that he does not become a Supreme Court justice. Is this a good strategy, Kathy?
You know, I'm not surprised at this strategy. What I will say is that they don't understand the law. Basically, what I understand is that a president can't be impeached for activities that occurred before the presidency. And I think this guy, Cohen, just cut a deal. From what I understand, the payments came from Donald Trump's personal funds, so they have nothing to do with the campaign fund. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Democrats try this route to call louder for impeachment, followed by what they were going to do anyway, which is block Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, Brett Kavanaugh is a separate entity. Most Americans believe, when polled, that he will become a Supreme Court justice. But the strategy, Susan, is to ask for more and more documents by way of stalling past the midterms. So that has been woven in now to the overall strategy. Do you think that will work, Susan?
I absolutely do not. I think Brett Kavanaugh will, in fact, be nominated in soon. You know, the Democrats have got to stop playing.
You mean confirmed?
Confirmed, I'm sorry. The Democrats really have to stop playing, high school cafeteria fights, so to speak, with everybody. And as far as the porn stars go, who remembers who they were dating 25 years ago? It's amazing that he's got that kind of memory. So I think that Kavanaugh will be nominated, and confirmed rather, and I believe without question that Michael Cohen is just a weasel.
Kathy, back to you then on this. As you see the big strategy, do you agree, here's my strategy with my look on it. They're asking for more and more documents on Brett Kavanaugh. If they can stall, they might not get him confirmed before the midterms. If in fact they can play this card, whether or not it was a crime, Michael Cohen stood up in front of a federal judge and said he and Donald Trump, then candidate Trump, conspired, and that's the key criminal word, to pay off right before the election, therefore making it campaign finance fraud. If that flies in the midterms coming up in November, the House will flip and Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker of the House. And then what happens? The House of Representatives starts hearings on impeachment because they won't let it go, Kathy. And then there will be articles of impeachment written up. Do you see that logic playing out? And if not, why not? Because from all polling, it looks like the Democrats could very well take the House of Representatives, barely, but still take it.
So what I would say about that is that, yes, I do agree that that is the Democrat strategy. It's always to stall and delay to get their own way. However, I'm not so certain that they'll be successful. What did we learn about polling from the last presidential election? It's inaccurate. And not only that, I think this strategy might backfire and help the Trump's base go out and vote for Republicans, because what we're seeing here is that this idea of conspiracy, again, this took place before he was president. Some of your best attorneys will tell you that this is not a crime. Michael Cohen may have committed crimes, but he's trying to implicate the president. And I think the Democrats are willing to glom onto anything, per your point, Terry, about the strategy and what they want to do and delay and stall until after the midterm election in hopes that they'll gain back the House. But I think that strategy might backfire and actually inspire Trump's base.
Well, Susan, you said, who cares who one slept with 25 years ago? Maybe America doesn't care about that. I certainly don't care about that. And you imply that you don't care about it. But what didn't happen 25 years ago and just happened weeks ago is Michael Cohen stating that in October of 16, right prior to the election, while he was a candidate for the presidency for a federal office, he and Mr. Trump conspired. That's the more contemporary piece. And when you raise your hand and you say, I've had a coming to Jesus moment, Your Honor, and this is exactly what happened. That's the contemporary piece. And that's the piece that the Dems are playing. And that piece, with all the Antifa and all of the socialists out there and all of the never Trumpers and I hate Trump and he's a balloon baby in a diaper, that is playing for the midterms. And that's what the Republicans need to be very, very cognizant of and careful. Susan.
Well, if Michael Cohen lies, which I think he is, then he reduces his sentence from, say, 30 years to 2 years. And I think the guy will lie and say anything to get his sentence reduced. I really do. I don't think he's a worthy person to get up and talk about anything at this point. I find that the Democrats and their digging for dirt all the time is so darn boring. You know, don't you want to talk about the things that are really important to this country? No. They want to talk about porn stars or about Michael Cohen or about conspiring to do something. I mean, they're like kids. Who wants to vote them in? I hope to God they really don't win the House or the Senate, because they're just more food fights.
It's very close. You say food fight. I say it's death by 1,000 cuts. Kathy. And the reason why I say that is because I agree with both of you that this is the constant drumbeat. Get him, get him, get him, get him. And we've seen that with the dossier. We've seen that this past week with a DOJ member, Bruce Orr, going into a private session with Congress. We've seen that with Peter Strzok. We've seen that with Lisa Page. We're probably going to see it eventually with Mueller himself, and other players. So it's death by 1,000 cuts is how I see it, or food fight or whatever. Nonetheless, it's real and it's there. I think it all hinges on these midterms, and it is, 23 seats, I think, that they have to gain out of, 435 House of Representatives seats, 23, but there are 5 that are really controversial, really, really close. Every poll says it could flip. And if Nancy Pelosi takes charge again, she says she's not going away. It will be for the next 2 years, the drumbeat to impeachment.
And it's exhausting, frankly. I'm getting tired of all of this, because you listen to the hacks on television, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, and to some degree Fox, that talk about this constantly. And a lot of people are frankly shutting off the news, and I am included in that audience. I'm tired, and this is a lawyer's tactic to wear down the enemy until you get what you want and win in the court of public opinion. But again, I'm hopeful that it will backfire and that Trump's base will be energized and will retain the House and the Senate and Nancy Pelosi can go back to San Francisco and wallow in the filth that is in that city.
Well, you say it may turn, or words to that effect. So let's talk about this in the remaining time we have for this segment. This past week, funny enough, Trump got a win with Mexico. Now, when it backfires when he puts points on the board, Kathy. So you put points on the board saying, hey, we've eased tension with Mexico because we're going to do a new, quote, NAFTA, whether Canada wants to play nice in the sandbox or not. That's a point on the board, Susan.
Yeah, well, I think that Canada will absolutely play with us too. They really can't afford to be a lone ranger on this continent, and they really will join us. I think what Trump did was pretty amazing. But then again, he's done an awful lot since he's been in office. And we have to also remember the man didn't become who he was without politics, without having a very tough skin.
Kathy?
I agree. And I think what's also occurring is that as Trump ticks off all these wins, people will see that people are back to work. And if you talk to folks in the middle of the country, they're thrilled that the jobs have come back, particularly in the factories. So I think he's got a lot of points on the board that the media, many of them, are not willing to recognize or promote because they have their own agenda, which is getting Nancy Pelosi back in as speaker.
I am not as optimistic that it's going to be Republicans in the House, Republicans hold the Senate, and of course, Donald Trump continue to do great things. I'm impressed with the things that he's done, but when you're constantly being attacked, it's not that he doesn't have thick skin, Susan. It's that it takes away from points on the board. It's a constant distraction. It's constantly circling the wagons, and he gets no reprieve from the press. It's really tough constantly not to have good things get out there when it's the constant, you did this badly, you did this badly, you continue to be this foul president on something he did 25 years ago. So the politics of it is channeled in large measure through a left-leaning media, and make no mistake about it, that left-leaning alphabet media, including major newspapers, is what America reads the most of. News folks, perhaps yourself is, a news junkie. Kathy and Susan, perhaps Kathy, you said you don't watch the news that much, but nonetheless, you probably watch the right-leaning news, but from the mass majority of Americans, they just don't so much. Let's just leave it there. We will look out to the midterms. A lot of primaries going on this past week, and we'll see where it lands. Thank you, ladies. Straight ahead, the glamour of Hollywood won't incorporate fur products anymore. I'll explain. You're listening to Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg, your host. This is the show where we reason first and then converse. America's Radio Town Hall. We're back on Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg with Kathy and Susan. In spite of the glamour of Hollywood, you might not see fur products there anymore. What is happening in Los Angeles? They are eager to fill their wardrobes. If you're a big movie star with fur products, you might want to stock up now, because the city council has been lobbied by animal welfare activists. And as such, they may ban completely the sale and the production of fur products. Now, they're not the first city to try to do this. But they are being influenced in large measure with animal welfare activists that have met with various city councilmen. This is highly controversial, because it would put a damper on what you can buy in stores. Kathy, I'll go to you first. How do you see this? Do you think this is a good move? Do you think other cities will pick up on it?
Fur has been controversial for a long time. I remember back in the day when they would showcase furs on television programs like Dynasty or even on The Price is Right, and they were all the rage. And so this controversy has been going on for some time. And my question to them is, okay, so you ban the sale of furs. What about people that still have them? Owning a fur is a complicated business. I inherited a fur from a relative, and I didn't realize when I inherited that fur that it requires proper storage and care and oiling and all these other things because it comes from an animal. The other question I have is that if they're going to ban the sale of furs in Los Angeles, are they also eventually going to ban the sale of meat or any other animal byproduct because they're concerned about the welfare of the animal? So while I understand that there are some people that have issues with fur, if it's done in a humane way, then I think banning this is on a slippery slope.
It's on a slippery slope because it's always a question of, well, what do you do with leather and the leather bag and the leather shoe? If you do fur, then you're also using leather most likely. And now you're eating an animal product. So it is a slippery slope, Susan.
I agree with both of you. I remember, as you said, Kathy, 50 years ago when someone threw paint at you if you walked down the street with a fur coat. I, too, inherited several furs. I just put them in storage and forgot about them and then finally gave them to Goodwill, not because I felt I shouldn't wear them. I just didn't want to wear them. It's just a silly thing. It's LA. I mean, who cares in the big picture? I mean, the people in the Midwest do not care whether the stars in LA wear fur.
And yet they wear fake fur or faux fur. So they're still trying to show the cosmetic of it, the glamour of it without it being fur. You know, you would think that if you're going to not wear fur and you're going to be less glamorous without it because you are an activist for the cause, then why fake it, Kathy? It seems like
I agree.
If you're going to wear false eyelashes, wear false eyelashes. And if you don't like the false eyelashes, don't wear mascara then.
I agree.
Oh, it's LA.
Well, and I think to your point earlier is that Hollywood is a fake place. So fake news, but also you've got fake furs, fake leather, everything else that goes along with what they consider to be glamorous. So again, I'm not surprised at the dichotomy that's going on there with respect to fake furs versus real furs. But, if you're going to ban furs, then they're probably going to ban other things. And I read in the paper earlier this week that all the rage are giraffe products. They're making items out of giraffe skin. And so now I believe it's New York wants to ban those products.
I'm curious about what you ladies think about this angle on this particular topic. It strikes me very much that furs aren't worth anything anymore. And so the putting it in storage and cleaning it and making it oiled down or brushed or all the things that's necessary, if you're not even going to wear it, why is it in storage? Because you pay for storage, unless you got it in a plastic bag under your bed or in your attic closet or something like that. I don't think they're valued anymore very high. What do you think? Susan?
Well, they're highly valued for one thing, not so much in this country, but they certainly are in Europe. And I have worn full-length mink coats, and I can tell you they are wonderfully warm.
Yes.
But, they're just sort of passé now. And if some designer wants to put fur on the models and put them down the runway, so be it. It's a passing phase. It's kind of boring. And as Kathy says, pretty soon we're going to meat products and giraffe products and shoe products, everything. It gets ridiculous. They should focus in LA on more important things.
Kathy, wrapping this segment up, do you think fur is worth anything anymore?
I don't. I think the value and the glamour of fur has lost its sheen.
And in Europe?
I think it's still popular in Europe, but here in the United States, I don't see that people are glomming onto furs. What was it? Dicker and Dicker and Company used to sell tons of furs there in Los Angeles, but overseas, maybe here in the U.S., probably not.
I don't have a fur coat. I have a little bit of a fur shawl, but I would never take it to Europe, even though if I'm going in Europe when it's cold, I should take it because, to Susan's point, it is very, very warm. But because the way you travel anymore, unless you're going in a first class Learjet, private jet, that or first class, it's very, very bulky. So I would, for mine, and it's just something that my mother gave me, I would probably eventually give it to the Goodwill. I don't think it's worth very much, and it certainly isn't worth the storage, and it certainly isn't worth getting it in my suitcase because it would take up a lot of space. And I don't want to take a second suitcase and pay for that with the airlines. All right, good discussion. I think the city council is definitely going to have their way on this, and fur will be banned. Straight ahead, let's talk about the importance of Black churches for Black prosperity. Be right back. Welcome back to Think America, where we reason first and then converse, turning our attention now to an interviewee I've wanted to get on the program for some time. He is Horace Cooper with Project 21. He's a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy, which has Project 21. He's also taught at George Mason University in Virginia and is a former senior counsel to Dick Armey, who was the House Majority Leader at one point. Horace, welcome to Think America. Nice to have you, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on the program.
I'm impressed with all of your television experience, where I see you talking about the Black experience, contemporary Black experience in America, and particularly on the importance of Black churches for Black prosperity. Let's talk about that. First, I want to also segue then into gun violence in Chicago and Black unemployment rates under President Trump. So let's talk about Black churches. I know that Black ministers work very, very hard to instill good moral values, often Judeo-Christian values, or just good values of follow the law, honor your mother and your father. If your father, of course, isn't in prison and your mother perhaps isn't on crack, it's hard to honor them and respect them if they are. But how are Black churches and ministers from the pulpit actually helping to keep families together, to keep kids off the street, out of a life of crime and drugs and so forth? How do you see it contemporarily?
Well, faith and religious practice are critical ingredients for any successful society. It is interesting to note that in the Black community, there's a higher level of church participation than in any other community in the United States. Here is the challenge that we face. American society has increasingly tried to marginalize the church and faith as part of how our American culture operates and exists. And that has been particularly harmful for Black Americans, just as it has been harmful for America as a whole. We absolutely should look upon what happened in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s in America, where in particular the Black church organizations worked not just to promote equality in the civil rights agenda, but even more important to that, they promoted the interest of strong, stable families, of the importance of letting little people, young people, grow up in a household where they were taught values of right and wrong and understood the importance of putting others, their fellow men, ahead of selfish considerations. Starting about the 1960s, America as a whole embarked on this "we don't need God" plan. We don't need the family plan. They also added, we need big government from Washington to dictate us, and we don't really trust free markets. In the context of the church, what has happened is that the church has been pushed from the center of the square, and that means for too many families and for too many children, the value system that the church provides hasn't been nearly as robust. This has been especially bad for Black America. We went from a circumstance where 70% of all Black children were born in two-family households in the late 1950s to today where 70+% of all Black children are born outside.
So, Horace, there's a lot of catching up that ministers, those at the lectern in parishes, counselors have to do to get God back front and center and not Washington front and center? How are they doing in the catch up?
Well, that's my point I was about to make, is that our ministers in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, even as late as the 1970s, were seen as the go-to people for life advice. And they gave great advice because it was born of faith. Today, we have penalized too many of our church leaders, too many of our church organizations, and it makes it hard to expect people to rely on them, those marginalized individuals, as the resource. We've recommended with our blueprint for a better deal for Black America that society change its attitude. Stop being anti-church. Stop being anti-faith. Instead of spending hundreds of billions of dollars on social services assistance for Black families or white families or brown families, let's restore the kind of value system that would make that not necessary.
All right. On that thread, let's segue into Chicago gun violence. The answer we are hearing to that, whether Mayor Emanuel likes it or not, is one, he needs to step down. That's what we're hearing. And two, Trump needs to come in and help in a place where he is demonized by sending in the military, or at least pushing so that the National Guard can help Rahm Emanuel. Now, based on what you just said, Horace, with the importance of the minister and those values, how can that message come in to help in the Black community when it looks like it may go militaristically?
Too many Black families, as well as white families and brown families, in the bluest parts of America are living in war zones. We have circumstances where crime is so elevated and out of control. Learning can't take place. Stable families aren't able to occupy, and people are unwilling to bring jobs in. What Rahm Emanuel needs to do is acknowledge that if you're going to get a handle on this crime epidemic, this murder and shooting epidemic in Chicago, you must make sure that families are protected. The best way to convey the importance of doing that is to work with church leaders. Rahm Emanuel and the governor of Illinois ought to immediately jointly request from the federal government support. There are a couple things that we at Project One have agreed would be very, very useful for Chicago to do. They need to have a joint task force between the federal government and the state government with regard to prosecution. If we catch you shooting or carrying a firearm illegally as a felon, instead of the tap you on the wrist and tell you nasty, no, don't do that anymore, we absolutely need to take those people into federal court and send them into prison for minimum terms. Secondly, the state of Illinois should work with the federal government so that they can temporarily, immediately bolster the number of boots on the ground. Thirdly, instead of these community services grants that try to teach the law enforcement how to be more woke, W-O-K-E, we should hire more individuals on a permanent level so that they can patrol our communities. The only way crime is going to stop in Chicago is if people who are engaging in the crime believe there's a heightened risk of apprehension and punishment.
All right, we're down to a minute, and all good thoughts there. Segue into how you see Black unemployment and leave us on a positive note. We're down to a minute, Horace.
All of America has seen this amazing dynamic economy, and Black Americans, ironically, have benefited the most. The unemployment rate has dropped lower for Black Americans than any other group, and we have set more records in the just 18 months of the Trump presidency for Black unemployment, if we can spread that activity all across the countries, including these deep blue city places, you're going to see remarkable transformation, and we commend the Trump administration for its efforts so far.
Horace Cooper, Senior Fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research with Project 21. Thank you so much. Talk later. I'll certainly have Horace Cooper back on the air. Kathy, what were your thoughts?
That was amazing. I think that he's got an excellent point that churches can help give a purpose and a place other than a gang den for children in particular to socialize, play, and learn what a family is other than perhaps their own parents.
Well, that message needs to come across because I'm hearing the militarization message. Oust Rahm Emanuel, Susan, and bring in the military. Susan.
Well, the military is unfortunate, but having grown up in the South, I can tell you that Black families at one time were extremely tight and extremely church-oriented. And getting back, as Kathy said, to the church is a very, very positive thing that would help this group immensely, even though it sounds small because it's the church, it's not some big military. I don't think bringing the military in all the time is going to do anything. You do need someone there that's in authority, but not necessarily the dogs and the police you just don't need that.
Let's switch topics. Some pediatricians are now writing an RX, and on the RX it says to play. It's a prescription for playing. Sometimes they write it as get your kid a nature play prescription. And doctors are advising, in short, that parents of any 12-year-old child, 12 and under, to visit a park, for example, once a week. This new prescription plan is part of a government program. Maybe you didn't want to hear that part. It's called Children and Nature Initiative from the National Environmental Education Foundation. So, Kathy, it seems obvious that parents have to get their kids outdoors. What is kind of sneaky in my read of this is that it is a government program, the National Environmental Education Foundation. And that rings all kinds of bells in my mind as a sneaky way to say, hey, we're a government program. We're a foundation. Give us some of your money if you'd like. And by the way, you will go out and you will do things that we proffer. Kathy.
I agree. And I think it's an opportunity for the government to promote this idea of climate change, global warming, and it combines two of the worst institutions in the government, in my opinion, the Environmental Protection Agency and the education group. But I think it's dumb because if you look in the past history of the news here, if the kids are a free-range kid, in other words, they're allowed to go out and play on their own, the cops can be called because the kid is unattended. Now they've got somebody to blame, which is the physician. Oh, the physician wrote me a prescription. So if something goes wrong, they can say, my doctor told me my kid could go outside and play. And let's also keep in mind that many of the children today are being raised by a generation of parents who do not know what it's like to go out and play, ride a bike, skin your knee, play on the playground because they've been bubble wrapped by helicopter parents themselves.
Mm-hmm. Susan?
I have to agree with you completely. I raise kids and dogs and the whole thing in the neighborhood, and I couldn't wait for my children to be outside, and they couldn't wait to be outside either. So I can't imagine a pediatrician in my times writing a prescription to say you've got to get out and go to a park once a week or see nature, see a bird, see a leaf. It's ridiculous. And when the government gets involved, I question it. I even question when someone says that they're with the government. That's the big thing. Because sometimes they just say it and have this little group on the side. They have nothing to do with the government.
All good points. What bugs me about this a lot is that the pediatrician is being the tool for the government.
Ridiculous.
Most pediatricians, when last I checked, they didn't like Obamacare. They didn't like the growth of socialized medicine. They've got their own little practice or they're associated with a hospital. And now the government is telling them how to write something as simple as go and get some fresh air. If I was a pediatrician, I would be insulted at this.
Listen, I think it's great that they do it.
Sneaky on the part of the government to use me as a tool, Susan.
Well, I do think it's sneaky like that. I think it's really, what's with these parents? They have a prescription to take their kids outside. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's ridiculous.
Well, they have this because many kids are couch potatoes, or they're with a nanny, or they're with a caregiver. The parents aren't there. It may be broken families. It may be an aunt that's raising some kid, and here today, gone tomorrow. The kid is a latchkey kid, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point, there's this confluence of the government, the National Environment Education Foundation, use a pediatrician. They become the nannies, Kathy. And we've heard all the time, the nanny state. This is a classic example of nanny state. In fact, there's multiple nannies, but the government is the big brother using these nanny threads to puppeteer over a child. That's how I see it.
Well, I would agree. And I think the other interesting thing is that since I'm in the nutrition industry, we know that childhood obesity is rampant. I could see this being a government program where the pediatrician is reimbursed from insurance or Obamacare or whatever based on how many scripts he or she writes to obese children to go out and play, so they can keep track of that. And if the child doesn't meet those weight parameters, then they're fined or they don't get reimbursed.
Good discussion all. Megan the Millennial will be with us. She has a lot to say on this. She is a lawyer, she's a mom, and she's also libertarian, and she's our millennial. She'll grab the mic in just a minute, right after the break. You're listening to Think America. Reason first, then converse. I'm Terry Gilberg. We're back on Think America. You can always find our archive shows at thinkamericaradio.com. Time now for Megan the Millennial. Always loving having her on the program. And she'll like this topic. Megan, some pediatricians are now writing prescriptions for playing for kids, and they're known sometimes as nature prescriptions. So a doctor would advise a parent of any child 12 and under to go out and visit a park or look up at the sky or go take a nature hike. But it's all part of a program from the National Environmental Education Foundation. So that was a red light that went up in my brain about, whoops, look at this. It's a government program, Children in Nature Initiative from the National Environmental Education Foundation. I think you'll have a lot to say on this one. Welcome.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, this is, it's actually laughable when you think about what they're trying to promote, as if all of us parents are running around like a bunch of idiots and we don't know that sunshine and fresh air and playing outside is good for our children. I mean, that's where I think a lot of these initiatives kind of get to me sometimes, when I think, wow, they must think that we are unbelievably stupid. For me not to understand this about my own child is a little ridiculous. But when you get past the humor, it's actually quite scary. This is the kind of stuff I'm particularly frightened when it comes to the government, because this is the ratchet effect. Slowly, every year, Terry, we're seeing more and more regulations. And keep in mind that when you see a regulation, it is created by a non-elected official. We have no representation when it comes to those rules and regulations. But we see these regulations and state laws that are voted by our legislature that come down that say you shouldn't be able to allow your child to walk home from school because it might be dangerous. Someone may possibly kidnap them. And we are seeing more and more encroachment of the nanny state into parenting. And just so you know, a parental right is a constitutional right. That's why, in theory, it's hard to take children away from their parents, because it is constitutionally protected. But when we start having these situations where doctors are prescribing things like playing outside, what we run into, Terry, is what happens when that parent does not fulfill that prescription. Then the doctor ostensibly has the duty to report the neglect to the state. Just like we saw when the dentist on the East Coast was reporting the fact that the mother hadn't brought in her child for the cavity removal that he believed the child needed, and he reported it to the state as neglect. This is where we get into really, really serious nanny state encroachment. This is very statist, and this is what we're seeing across the country. I would like to see our state legislators jumping in and actually saving us from this kind of stuff. We're seeing some of these things happening around the country. There are states that are enacting laws that actually they call it the Parental Rights Bill, that actually reinstates our right to parent our children. I would like to see that around the entire country, where every state is taking this call up and taking this to action and saying, no, we're going to trust the individual parent to do the right thing.
One of the things that really gets my dander up is when the government uses a doctor in this regard, just like the example about the kid who has a cavity, that tooth needs to be filled with a sealant for that cavity, or it needs to be pulled. And when a doctor then is charged by the government to say, whoops, we're looking at a case of child neglect or child abuse. Now the doctor, many of them in private practice, is a tool for the government.
Oh, 100%. It is very dangerous. It's actually really not funny.
So what do we do about it? You mentioned lawmakers. To me, so much is common sense, but it's not common sense if you're a little babysitter or a older brother that's sitting in to be the babysitter at the time, or an aunt it's not the biological parent, it's just an aunt there. How do we do this other than legislation or, screaming on talk radio, for example, about this?
Right. Well, I think it comes down to community. I think we need to start talking to our neighbors more. If you see something that you feel is endangering to a child, go and tell their parent. Don't call the police on them.
Let's end on a high note, as we always do with our segment, Change Your Life Technology. What have you got this week?
We're talking about water, which we do a lot on Change Your Life Technology. And in Kibera, which is one of the largest ghettos in Africa, we actually have a company that's come out with some aerial water, some aerial piping. It's 20 feet above the ground. The network consists of overhead pipes that are supported by wooden poles that connect to 10 different water kiosks. This has been a huge deal for the people in Kibera. This is coming out of Shining Hope for Communities. It was actually founded by a local Kiberan, and he just was awarded $2 million to continue this great work.
Thank you, Megan. Good ideas. We need to leave it there. You are listening to Think America. That's it for this edition. I'm Terry Gilberg. Reason first and then converse. Are you finding it hard to be rude to robots? We'll discuss how hard it really is. State governments that are in a risky financial condition because of underfunded public pension plans. And the wall. With Molly Tippett's death, is she another brick in the wall? Hello there, Terry here on Think America, where we reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilberg, your host. This is America's Radio Town Hall. I invite two everyday Americans to the microphone from where they are in America to talk about thought-provoking conversation starters. We have Kathy. Kathy is in the nutrition science industry. Hello, Kathy. Nice to have you on the show.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Good. And Susan is with us. Susan is a pilot and also very active with Daughters of the American Revolution. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
I didn't know the DAR was still a very active program, but I'm happy to hear that you're involved. Let's get started right on the program today, ladies. What does Duncan Hunter have to do with the midterms? All right. He is California's 50th district's congressman currently, but he entered a plea of not guilty. And he was indicted on many, many counts, as well as his wife. There's a laundry list of him spending on personal items with campaign funds. There was Italian vacation that was listed, a trip to Pittsburgh, resort and spa in Arizona where he and his wife went. There was Steelers games tickets, private tuition, dental pills paid. But he says he is not guilty. I say this, regardless if you're guilty or not, we in our country presume you're innocent, Mr. Hunter and Mrs. Hunter. So hang in there. Don't resign, because if he resigns, the Dems get another seat most likely. If he hangs in there, Kathy, then it will be the march toward his trial, etc., which will be past the midterms. Every Republican seat is necessary for the midterms. So he's presumed innocent, even though he entered, or the prosecution has entered into court documents all of these items on his felonious alleged behavior. Yet if he hangs in there, it is more the chance that that seat will stay red. Kathy.
I agree. And to your point, he just needs to hang in there and let the justice system do its thing, because he entered a plea of not guilty. The onus is on them to prove it. And it's California. So I think a lot of the U.S. attorney's offices there are very partial to Democrats. And I think the timing of this is very convenient because it's a highly contested seat. So they want to do whatever they can to delay, make people look bad. And he just needs to hang in there so we can hang on to that seat until after the midterms.
Playing devil's advocate, Susan, $250,000 in campaign finance money used for personal gain. That's $250,000. The prosecution in their case, and I looked at some of it to the extent that I could, and it is very indicting. They got him by the short hairs on multiple examples. I'm not sure he can survive this in the long haul, but he may survive it in the short haul through the midterms. How do you see it?
Well, I agree. He may not survive the long haul, but for the midterms, I think he can get through. It's some of these things that are written out. They're sort of what I call found receipts. They say, oh, look, they went to Italy then or whatever. Oh, they had to pay for funds. They didn't have the money. Do they actually have the proof that this was taken out of campaign funds? They don't say they have the proof. They'd be waving those papers in the sky high if they did. So, it's back to the old, well, we're inferring that you've done this. And maybe he actually did do all this, but we don't know yet. As you know, we are innocent until proven guilty in this country. And even by the Democrats' way of thinking. So I think that he's going to be fine. If he did do all this, shame on him, because that's not what the campaign's funds are for. But remember, there are people who are campaigning now who spend millions of dollars for their profile. And it does come out of campaign funds. But you have to be careful as to what comes out. Paying off Stormy Daniels obviously is a no-no, but that was pre-funds with Trump, so that doesn't count. We don't really know all these things if they really came out of campaign trust. So I say, hey.
Well, and the other thing, to your point, Susan, which is a very astute point, the fact that he had his wife as not only power of attorney during his military career, and she was major bookkeeper, bottle washer, power of attorney. She sort of did a lot during his military career, but then that bled over into his political life and she stayed on. So in some respects, she's the wind beneath his wings, and the spotlight, Susan, to your point, it's looking on the wife. They've indicted her as well. But as far as him sort of getting through this court case that is upon him, he may very well skate because, and the wife may take the fall because she was the one with the books. She was the one that had power of attorney. She's the one that has to say, yes, that's a campaign finance when we have to go to Pittsburgh. Then the prosecution looks at her and says, no, it wasn't, because you texted what a lovely vacation we're having in Pittsburgh. Why did you text that?
Okay, no.
I think she was sloppy. And I think she may have pushed the envelope. But I also think as long as he's in the race, and by the way, when the last poll I checked on Duncan Hunter, he was up about 13 points now against his challenger. Go ahead, Susan, your thoughts on that.
No, I honestly, looking at her, and I know that she had power of attorney during his military career and maintained it. Why? I don't know, but she did, and it was okay with him. But she, with her just keeping the bills, I'm sure she had two little books, and one was dental and one was Pittsburgh and one was campaign. I really wonder if this woman actually did this as far as lapping over, we don't get to make that much money, maybe blah, 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 I'll take it out of the campaign fund. I don't think she would be so naive as to do something like that at this point. He's not a first-time runner, is he? No. So I just don't think that she would be dumb enough to do something like that, because people who have been in politics know that you've got worms looking for you underneath your skirt all day long. So I say let's wait and play this out and see what really comes to the front. I think this is just a bunch of Dems screaming foul again.
Kathy, Hunter is doing media appearances all the time. The minute this indictment came out, he grabbed any microphone he could and said, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. I will fight this. My personal take on that, very smart. As hard as it was, One thing that we do know in media, in communication, is if somebody is attacking you, you have to have the last word back or you're not in the game. So he did. He grabbed a mic. He said, I am not guilty. He said the campaign itself incurred expensive bills, which I have paid back. Now, he didn't list which ones, Kathy, but he defended himself quite a bit on every show. And I was button punching, seeing is he up, amid the cacophony of voices of Russia, 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 and all the Trump stuff and so forth, because it was a really, really bad week for Trump. And they always say, too, by the way, Kathy, they say it comes in threes. So you got Manafort, you got Cohen, and now you got Hunter, and all roads seem to lead to Trump. But nonetheless, he stood up there. He said the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Diego is partial to Democrats anyway. 3 of them showed up at Hillary Clinton fundraisers. They're out to get me. The timing is terrible for me, and they knew it. And I'm going to defend myself vigorously. Maybe his polls rose in points because of that. So it's interesting how he stepped up and defended himself right away. And I think he's going to survive through the midterms, frankly.
I agree. And I think it was a very smart PR move on his part to appear on just about every channel. So he grabbed the mic everywhere. He defended himself. And again, it adds to the narrative on the right that a lot of these plays are witch hunts, that the media is part of all of this. He's proclaiming his innocence. He'll survive the midterms, I think, as a result. And again, it's questioning the Democrats' motives. And to Duncan Hunter's point that the Democrats in San Diego, the U.S. Attorney's Office, were fans of Hillary Clinton just shows the type of bias that we've seen with the New York district attorney and others that have done the same thing to Trump. So I think it's a pattern that we're seeing, and it's likely going to backfire. So kudos to him for appearing in the media and defending himself instead of acting like some of the Republicans have in the past, where they fade away from the spotlight because they're fearful. Good for him for showing up.
I thought it was interesting, too, ladies, that I didn't hear a lot of support from other Republicans in California because it's very hard to support all of these alleged felonies. But I did hear this. Darrell Issa, Republican, that seat open in District 49. Jeff Denham, that seat is a toss-up in District 10, another Republican. Republican Ed Royce, open seat in District 39. Steve Knight in District 25. These are critical districts. And the Republicans, the Democrats rather, need to flip 24 seats in California if they are going to hold the House or win over the House. 24 seats altogether, 5 that are very critical in California. It is a kind of neck and neck. So what I did hear is look at the landscape, but I didn't hear a lot of let's go support Duncan Hunter. And I didn't hear a lot of strategy out of anybody else other than Duncan Hunter saying, I am not guilty. So the strategists, it seems, are people like us saying, well, if he holds on through the midterms, and who knows what's going to happen. He could very well win it, or if he doesn't win it, less time, he could resign with, I don't know, grace and still keep the seat red. He's got to play this out. But it was interesting that I didn't hear, Susan, a lot of Republicans come to his defense. I think they were kind of scrambling a little bit, kind of what am I going to say about this?
Right. I think they're just going to lie low for a little bit. No, but he said he's taking care of it himself. I think he's going to be fine. I really do. I think the Dems, once again, missed the point.
And Kathy, as we wrap up this segment.
I agree. And I think some of the other Republicans are hesitant to support because they're waiting to see what happens. So they're waiting for the justice system to do what it does. And they may say this is an important seat and leave it at that, but not favor him one way or another.
Well, we all have to remember that he is innocent till proven. The Republicans will have to help him through after the midterms because they're not really helping him right now. The only piece of help which I can see coming soon, after we get through this primary season, is the Republican Party dropping money on his campaign, which is a bit of an irony given that he is allegedly guilty, according to the Republican, according to the prosecution, of all of these things. So I still think the RNC will be dropping money on his campaign to get him over the line for the midterms. All right. So those are my thoughts. Thank you to Kathy and to Susan about all of that. It's a very interesting chessboard out there in California. Straight ahead, finding it hard to be rude to robots. Robots looking more and more like, well, us. Especially, I might add, those sex robots. We'll discuss straight ahead on Think America, where we reason first, then converse. We're back on Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg. Nice to have you all listening to Think America. A big shout out to our Phoenix affiliate, KTAR, and to all of our affiliates, especially our affiliate way out there in Guam. You can find all of our shows at thinkamericaradio.com. Finding it hard to be rude to robots. This is psychological transference. Robots are looking more and more like us, especially the sex robots. Boy, that's a big industry. And as such, psychologists, even sociologists, are warning human beings that when interacting with a robot, to remember that it has, well, no emotions. It may look like it's human, but it has no emotions. It's just a robot. It's a computer. All right. But people get attached. If a robot looks like a person, when people have a hard time, people don't have a hard time not being nice to it. And examples of this are Alexa and Siri. Hi, Siri. Can you tell me where an Italian restaurant is? Hi, Siri. Call such and such for me. And she will talk back. It's all robotic. We're getting used to relating to Alexa also in the home. Kathy, do you have any vocal robots, and do you relate to them as people?
I have an Alexa and I have a Siri, and I just use them for occasional, like you said, call somebody, play this song, find this radio station, and that kind of thing. But they have such a robotic voice that you wouldn't even consider them to be human because there's no emotion in the voice that's repeated back. Now, these sex robots, I've seen photographs of those, and they're very realistic. And from what I understand, they can sweat, they look like people, they have skin that feels like a human being's, and they say nice things. And I think that's the key there, is not only the tone of voice and the mannerisms, but what they say to the person to get them to connect more on a social level as well as a physical one. And that's really scary.
Well, on the sex robots in particular, they have movements. There's a lot of things they can relate back to the user. It is a motorized doll, and it's far from the days of the chatty Cathy, Susan. I don't know if you remember the chatty Cathy or not.
I refuse to acknowledge I'm my age.
Well, remember the chatty Cathy doll?
I do.
Where you pull the cord from the back of her neck and she would say things. That little cord would often get broken in my household where there were 5 girls. I grew up with 4 sisters. But nonetheless, that was the beginning of this kind of interacting with the doll. With regard to sex, psychologists are really saying this is a really, really, really dangerous area where you're going in relating to this doll. This is highly computerized, motorized doll rather than a human being, Susan.
Yeah, wasn't there a movie last year that had something to do with a robot? I forgot what it was called. I think, I can't remember. But
do you think we'll be attached to robots as family, Susan?
I doubt it. In the big picture, it'll be just kind of another toy. It won't be in my generation, put it to you that way. It could be in several generations from now that it could be, but not today, really.
And you're feeling, Kathy, about that, being having this transference so great that they're part of the family. I'm reminded of George Jetson in the comic strip or the television series that I used to grow up with, the Flintstones, back to the, going back to the cave time, and then Back to the Future with George Jetson, two of my favorite shows.
Yeah, on the Jetsons, they had Rosie the robot that was the housekeeper, and she was part of the family. And I think for some people that are socially isolated, maybe they don't have good social skills, they're integrated in with the network on social media all the time, they have difficulty in maintaining relationships with human beings, that this may be their way out to feel less lonely and feel connected to someone, or in this case, something.
And here's the key on this topic, and this was an article from The Guardian on technology. If the robot looks like a person, like Rosie the robot, as you talk about, Kathy, if the robot looks like a person, we have a very hard time not being nice to it. Here's an example. I'm driving down the freeway, for example, and I've got my cell phone in my hand. And maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should have it on the dash where I can, relate to it like it would be a button on the radio, and I'm just button punching, trying to find my favorite station. But no, it's in my hand, unfortunately, and I am thinking ahead, and I'm a little nervous. I'm trying to get to my destination, and I press down my thumb on that button at the bottom of my cell phone. Siri, where is that restaurant? Now, I'm a little nervous because I'm late for it. I am a little rude to her. So the reverse can be true too. And this is what psychologists are saying. We relate to them as human beings. We get angry. We throw our cell phones, just like a professional golfer might get angry with his own performance on the last tee of that course, and he throws his golf club. We relate in ways that are human ways, but all of a sudden now I've got my cell phone on, not on the dash where it needed to be, where I just touch it like I'm touching a radio dial, but it's on the floor. And now I'm even more irritated. Psychologists are saying that it's both. We love them and then we hate them, and it's just this tool, Kathy.
Well, I think what would be even scarier is that if you were to throw your cell phone, if it would respond back and say, "Why did you throw me? Terry, why did you do that?"
Interesting.
It's a lot like Westworld, where the robots took over. It's a scary thing that could happen.
Yeah. Well, in any event, we have this psychological transference going on. Psychologists and sociologists are warning us right now about it, especially those who are buying sex robots, these motorized sex dolls. Good discussion, lady. Thank you. Straight ahead, let's talk about Molly Tibbetts' death. She died of stabbing from an illegal alien. Alleged, but that is what the authorities are telling us. Welcome back to Think America. I'm Terry Gilberg. This is America's Radio Town Hall. And I always invite expert guests on the program, too, to hear their voices. I'd like to talk with Mark Spencer of Judicial Watch. He's out in the southwest of America, and he is a border watch reporter. He knows everything there is, it seems, on anything immigration related, and he reports back to Judicial Watch. Let's get right into this tragic death, Mark Spencer, of Molly Tibbetts. She's the college-age, beautiful brunette who went out for a jog in Iowa and went missing. She was abducted and allegedly, I've got to throw that word in there, stabbed to death before she was thrown into a cornfield. I say it's another American death by an illegal, which is another brick in the wall. Because, Mark Spencer, I don't see a wall up yet. I don't see a lot of progress on this. What I do see is protests against ICE agents. What I do see is high cost of incarceration for illegals. And what I do see is a lot of fists in the air about Trump and separating families. But I don't see a lot of progress on the wall. Talk to us about Molly Tibbetts' death and if that is a link to the wall.
Well, it clearly is a link to the wall, which in the bigger picture is linked to the crime. Remember, crime of illegal immigration. That's where Judicial Watch really pays attention to this issue because it's a rule of law matter. You know, as a father of a 20-something daughter, as a police officer, 25 years with Phoenix, and as a person who lives probably an hour and a half away from that southern border, this is more than just a policy issue. This is reality. And what you refer to as another brick in the wall, and I know you don't mean any disrespect. It's a figure of speech. Let me add another figure of speech to that, Terry. What we have here, when we embrace lawlessness when it comes to illegal immigration, is another casualty. And whether it be elites on the right or elites on the left, those who embrace illegal immigration or refuse to enforce the law, embrace an acceptable casualty rate. There's another body lying at our feet, another life of potential wasted away because we have a political agenda or a profit agenda in play.
Well, I say brick in the wall. Maybe I should have said brick for the wall, because as more Americans die at the hand of an illegal vis-a-vis crime, that will ring louder and louder. Same with Kate Steinle, the drumbeat about get the wall up. Actually, her death propelled Trump to put that as his number one campaign focus. Mark, you talk about crime. I was surprised that there hasn't been any discussion in the national airwaves about whether or not she was sexually assaulted as well. Now, maybe that will come out. We did hear many days later that she was stabbed multiple times. It strikes me that not having a sexual assault, even discussion, that this is a crime of tremendous violence. So where did that come from? She's a jogger. He had seen her a little bit, and all of a sudden this violence towards her. So did you find that odd as I did? I was almost thinking that we would hear she was sexually assaulted, then she was killed, and then she was thrown into the cornfield. How do you see that?
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily find it as odd, because I think there's a principle in place here, certainly in law enforcement, is lawlessness leads to more lawlessness. Let's just set Molly Tibbetts aside for just 1 minute. Let's go to Philadelphia. And they just released an illegal from Honduras that was arrested for raping a child. There's more violence. So it's very... If we refuse to, and what's interesting, Terry, is we can go back to the 9/11 terrorists. Out of those group of men that killed 3,000 American citizens, roughly a third of them were in violation of civil immigration statutes. And we treat civil infractions as if they're unimportant, but they are. If we address crime at the lowest level, we deter it from spinning out of control. Here you have a young girl murdered and just disposed of in a field like a bag of garbage. He shouldn't have been here in the first place. And if we are proactive up front on the border and in the interior, we'll save countless lives and just avoid countless costs inside.
And no doubt, and I'm with you there. I was just kind of wondering about the violent aspect, because it almost struck me, and then we'll talk about sanctuary cities. It almost struck me on this, though, Mark, that she was hit multiple times, and that this dairy farmer helpmate on a farm went from zero to just enraged. I wonder if he was connected with a gang that was part of that. He said he was knocked out. He doesn't remember. He blanked out. This one individual did all of those wounds to her body. I'm not saying he couldn't have. I'm saying he may have had help, or at least it crossed my mind he could have had help. What do you think about that?
Well, Terry, I know it's frustrating, and I can sense the frustration with you. It's tough to put sensibility to senselessness, and crime never makes sense, and certainly to the victim and to the victim's family. And here we have people that are willing to, and we both heard this in the past. Well, they're just here for hope and love. These illegals are here to find hope and love. Terry, I've never met a criminal that wasn't engaged in criminal activity for the reason of hope or love, whether it's a Hell's Angel or a Black Panther, whether it's a drug dealer or a child molester or a bank robber. They're all in it ultimately for hope and love to benefit them and their families with complete indifference to others. So indifference rarely brings about sensibility, but it certainly frequently brings about victims. That's what you have here. It's consistent. It is a consistent outcome or byproduct of lawlessness. And we'll think, oh, well, it's just drunk driving with children. Well, it's just an illegal alien till you get Kate Steinle or Molly Tibbetts. Once again, we go back to that principle. Lawlessness leads to more lawlessness, and the laws are there to protect people and property. And when we disregard or disengage, there's going to be a lot of disastrous results, and people, here's the most critical thing, people will fail to live up to the full potential that they were created to, and it's just shameful.
Well, indeed, because they're gone now. Speaking of lawlessness, let's segue into the lawlessness of these sanctuary cities. And in particular, there's a lot of talk in Portland about Portland remaining a sanctuary city or being blessed as being a sanctuary city, being deemed a sanctuary city like San Francisco is. What can the average non-citizen of Oregon do to stop this? What can the average non-citizen of San Francisco do to turn it back the way San Francisco used to be? Because city council embraces it as a sanctuary city. I heard a little bit, Mark, that there's some movement afoot about stopping Portland from being deemed official sanctuary city. What's that all about?
And you use the term average citizen. You know, police officers carry a gun. That's a powerful weapon. Well, you know, average citizens have a powerful weapon or a powerful tool also, and it's called a vote. And you and I are familiar with the adage, all politics are local. And communities and voters and communities need to pay attention to local elections with those councils, with the state reps and the state senators, which trickle up, because we'll have a national impact at a local level. They need to pay attention to who they're putting into office, because when the police become your enemy, that's a bad day when bad guys become your friends. So what citizens need to do, and I think they are more and more, they're paying attention. They're getting valid news sources, valid sources of information to make informed decisions. I think as long as one lines up with the rule of law, and that rule of law is reasonable, and the spirit of the law is enforced, the quality of life in the community it sure is
enhanced. Yes. Mark, we're running out of time. I love having you on the program, so I'll invite you back, but we need to wrap it up for this interview. Mark Spencer is of Judicial Watch, and he is the Southwest border reporter and immigration reporter vis-a-vis crime. Thanks for being on the program, Mark.
You bet. Thanks.
We're back on Think America. Kathy, what'd you think of the Mark Spencer interview from Judicial Watch?
I think it was an amazing way to demonstrate how this is a problem not just in the Southwest, but throughout the United States, whether it's Portland, Oregon, or it's in Iowa. These violent criminals that come from south of the border or wherever else are harming our citizens, and something needs to be done, including building the wall and addressing it from a police standpoint as well.
And Susan, what's your take?
There's no question in my mind that the wall it is getting built now, has to be built. We have to keep these people out. That's one way of keeping them out. The border, you know, it's our country. We either protect it or forget about it.
Yeah, when last I checked, we were still a sovereign nation, right? Let's move on to another topic, ladies. State governments that are in a risky financial condition share a glaring commonality: underfunded public pension plans. Have you heard about this? It is hard to understand how the problem was created in the first place. But as we look into it all the more, then you could say it's not hard to understand it, because government unions and politicians are in cahoots with each other legally. One way for union bosses to substantiate their dues is to promise generous, and I mean sometimes overly generous, pensions to all of those union members. And they know this because politicians then also know it. They talk to politicians. Politicians then will allow it because they need the members' votes for the politicians to stay in office. Okay, that's the tee up. It can also go a little sideways. The same state government politician who benefits from the union vote often and continually underfunds the pension in favor of using the money for something that has more immediate payoff. So you're getting in thick and deep, but then oftentimes the politician grabs that for his own, Kathy.
I agree. And I come from a union family, so I understand how important it is that after retirement, those who chose to join a union or did it as part of their career, it's important for them to receive their pension. So I blame the powers that be not only on the union leadership, but also the politicians. We've known about this for a long time, and I believe Illinois is one of the most robust examples of this. It's a huge liability. So maybe they need to consider privatizing the funding, to a third party to limit the corruption. But we know the pension funds have been looted for years by a number of different entities, and that will remain. And the other thing I'm aware of is that this is part of some state constitutions where it says in the state constitution that these public pensions must be funded. They just don't say how to do that.
A good point. I was going to make that myself. Susan, the Supreme Court earlier this year dealt a pretty major blow to public unions. They ruled that government workers who choose not to join a union may then, in turn, not be required to help pay for that collective bargaining. I was in favor of that ruling, but unfunded public employee pensions now are affected. How do you see it?
They certainly are. I am not from a union family, but I do listen to what people say about unions. And, Trump talked about draining the swamp, and this is part of it with the big government. I'm not talking about state government, but big government does this. They need the money. They play games. What's the largest group on Capitol Hill today? It's the NRA. And the NRA puts millions of dollars into their projects, and they're never going to go away. So I really don't know that much about as far as public unions go and things like that. There's just out of my league completely. I do know I sat on a plane with a woman from California who was a retired professor, and she told me 5 years ago that California could not afford to pay their professors once they retired from the state universities, which was a shock.
California has a big problem with all of this, and now you don't have to pay dues according to the Supreme Court. We're down to about a minute or so. Kathy, final thoughts on this topic?
I think it's the last nail in the coffin. Unions need to go away. They're no longer essential. People get a minimum wage. If they choose to work there, great. But if they don't want to participate in a union, that should not deter them from getting a job that they want and building their own career.
Sometimes unions, though, help with the general collective feeling of the worker, which was why they were formed in the first place. And I wonder if that activism can manifest itself elsewhere, because now you don't have to join and you don't have to pay. And when that happens, there is a crumbling of the strength in number philosophy, Kathy. So it's food for thought. We'll see how it goes forward. But you're right. California cannot afford all of these pensions, not just with teachers, but with other unions. And they're looking, as time marches on, to getting their pension. All right. Thanks, ladies. We'll hear what Megan has to say about all this. Megan the Millennial up next on Think America, thinkamericaradio.com. Welcome back to Think America. We've been talking about how state governments that are in a very risky financial situation do share a commonality, and that is underfunded public pension plans. Megan, it is with us, and she has a lot to say on this. She's an attorney and a millennial and a small business owner. It's hard not to understand how the problem was created in the first place. At first, we didn't realize it, but then we came to realize that government unions and politicians are actually kind of in cahoots together. And they're in cahoots together legally, I think, Megan, because one way for the union bosses to substantiate their dues is to promise these huge pensions, right? So you get rich, we get rich, you're going to get a huge pension. I make big dues. A dues comes in, and I'm a union boss member, and I'm rich as well. Well, guess what? The Supreme Court dealt a blow to public unions this past summer by ruling that government workers who choose not to join a union may not be required to help pay for that collective bargaining. Oh boy, now how do you see it going forward with this Supreme Court ruling in play, Megan?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important things that the Supreme Court has done in the last 5 years. This is really, really big, Terry. And actually, it should have gone without any kind of decision from the Supreme Court. This should have been something that we are inherently knew, that people cannot be compelled to join a union, cannot be compelled to join anything. It violates a number of facets of our Constitution. I'm really happy that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the worker, because that's truly what they did. Now, the unions are going to spin this another way. They're going to say, well, now we don't have the same bargaining power. This is going to hurt the union worker himself or herself because they won't have the same leverage that they had before, because we won't have as much money as we did before.
Correct.
This is the same argument that all of the public schools make, right? We won't be as effective because we won't have as much of your money. But again, it is directly proportionate to the membership that they have. They're always, of course, going to be worrying about the free market coming in, Terry, and saving this, because the truth is that these workers can now negotiate directly with the employer, and they may undercut some of these unions, which will make them upset and obviously cause this thing to potentially come crumbling down. But it already was. This is just the death knell with the pension issue that we've had. And this has been going on for quite some time. This is, it explains a lot of what's happening in Detroit, for example. We're experiencing $1.8 trillion deficit in our countrywide pensions right now. So the truth is that this was already going to happen, Terry. The Supreme Court, all they've done now is allowed these workers to exit faster and possibly kill this thing faster than it would have on its own. So I'm excited about it. Now, how they're going to recoup that, I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't think that they ever will. I think that money is absolutely gone. It's one of those things that's going to have to be written off. And possibly there was some insurance for some of the bondholders and the pensioners. But I think that money's gone, Terry, unfortunately.
I think the money is gone too. So the same question that I asked of Terry's talkers, I'm going to ask of you. How in the world then will the activism be solidified if people aren't in a union? How will that? Because now we're all individuals. And we're down to about 2 minutes.
Right. And this is something I tell people all the time. This is something that happens with women. People are constantly trying to advocate for women. I don't need a group to advocate for me.
All right.
My needs are special. They're individual. Please don't put me in a box.
Okay. Very good. No groupthink identity for Megan the Millennial. What do you got in Change Your Life technology, my friend?
Well, we're talking a lot about babies lately, and we're talking about premature babies, actually, especially in developing countries where there's a high incidence of prematurity and low birth weight. And then they also can't afford the incubators. Unfortunately, a body temperature is very important for premature babies. And especially in these developing countries, they're losing a lot of premature babies. So of course, the free market provides, and there's a company that has come out. It's called Bempu, BEMPU, and it's a temperature monitoring bracelet that fits on the baby's wrist. And it allows the parents to know if the baby is cold. So it's really great because not only does it inform a medical provider, but it allows the parent to know. So the parent goes and picks up that baby, wraps them up, and holds them close to their chest to warm them up, which is increasing the not only the parent to child contact, but the child's body weight. The body temperature as well.
You can find all of the Change Your Life technology segments on our website, thinkamericaradio.com. All the segments for Change Your Life Technology, sponsored by yourcontractshop.com. You can learn more about Megan Porth at yourcontractshop.com. Thank you, Megan. Thank you to Susan for being on the program. Thank you to Kathy for being on the program. Thanks to all of our affiliates. Appreciate you all. Until next time, we are Think America. Reason first and then converse. I'm Terry Gilberg. See you then.